So thank you for coming along, everybody, this morning. And um, going, the talk's going to have a couple of elements. I'm going to look at a couple of frameworks that you may or may not be familiar with. So we'll be looking at the IAP2 participation, and also looking at the deciding doing continuum. So and what I'll do is mash that together a little bit, and we'll talk about some of those key elements. I have sort of 5 key elements to respectful engagement, so we'll talk about that as well. So what is respectful engagement? And the little photo you've got up there at the moment is where I've mashed up the IAP2, which is the public participation model, along with the deciding doing continuum. But what I'm going to do is pull them apart, and then we'll talk about what they look like when in this overlay that I've done. So many of you, and I'm going to try and be able to see your faces, are people familiar with the IAP2 spectrum of public participation? I can see some nodding, I can see some shaking. Yep. Okay. So it is probably, particularly in Australia and the US, it's probably quite a familiar one. And it talks about the different levels of public participation, and looking at what the goal of that participation is, and give some examples of techniques. Now, that in itself is great. It gives you a bit of an idea of working out what level of participation you want, thinking about why you doing any sort of consultation, why are you asking for people to engage. Where I see it done badly is where people think it's a step-by-step process. So I started inform and I work to empower. I would challenge everybody to think of it as individual elements rather than a ladder that I need to climb, starting with inform. Because really, information is generally very one-way communication. You're just telling people what you're going to do, or and what you're doing, and it's usually what you're doing to them. Whether it's a new policy or a new project or a new program, always try and aim for for the collaborate or empower. Where can you start? Rather than making decisions and then going and telling people about them. Where can we have people involved from the onset, and rather than have people being an afterthought, or just saying to them, look at this shiny new bauble I've made, can you all agree that you love this bauble, rather than actually having people involved in designing, because that new shiny bauble may not be a bauble, it could be a star, it could be anything. So that's a little bit of an overview. And then I did some work a few years ago with Denise Baiju from Catalyse in New Zealand. So Joanne and Robin may be familiar, and we did have Denise as one of our guest speakers early on, and she introduced me to the deciding doing continuum. And this just blew my mind, because it actually did not necessarily give you the tools to do things, but it spoke about that space of invitation. So, and then when I looked at, the overlay, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I'll go back to that first slide. It made me realise that the IAP2 was missing something. And what it was missing is particularly the areas of that co-creating, co-producing, and thinking about the power dynamics. So if we start with, as you can see there with the deciding doing, those sort of coercing and compelling, which is that power over. rather than moving into that partnering and locally led, which is power as. So it's people led rather than project or discipline led. So I always think now, okay, where is that space of invitation, and how am I sharing power with anything that I'm doing? So it's a really, for me, this sat much more comfortably than IAP2, which I always felt was missing something. And, you know, strangely enough, it seemed to be missing people or the broader community. So what I was sitting with Dee one day, and we'd been talking about these two frameworks, and that's when I had the idea of, sorry, I'm going to go back, of doing this, of that sort of overlaying, so I could place where these two engagement frameworks sat, you know, and I realised that for a lot of the parts of IAP2, it actually sat below that space of invitation where we're sharing power and control, which sort of challenged me a little bit. So now thinking about when I'm working with communities, or when I'm working with anybody, it's about where do we make sure that space of invitation is at top of mind, and we don't do anything unless everybody's contributing or collaborating. And even looking at, been having this conversation with my local government around our municipal emergency management plan, which has typically been done very much in an informed mode. They've, you know, somebody at local government has written it up and put it out to community for consultation. You know, do you like this? You get to change a word here or there, to actually thinking about how we could be much more collaborative in the first instance, keeping in mind that there are some overarching legislative requirements for those particular plans, but it's actually thinking about, okay, within this plan or within this policy document that we're doing, where is it that we can move to that place of collaborating and co-producing with community, understanding that yes, some of it may be at the consulting level, but always asking, but what else can we do? How else can we get people's voices involved in this so that people actually have ownership over whatever it is? You know, any work that we do with community should never be done too, because that's when we lose that trust, we lose that sense of trust with people. So moving on, thinking, and I said to you at the beginning that I sort of had those 5 key principles that I always work with. So first one, a bit of a no-brainer, is that, you know, be open and honest, and that's really about taking your authentic self to community and meeting community where they're at. I remember during the bushfire recovery here in Victoria, the number of people that would come out to do consultation with community wearing, you know, stilettos or, you know, suits and ties and things like that. That's not about meeting community where they're at. That's you know, that's showing up with your power suit on. So really think about how do you show up in community, and how do people recognise themselves in you, with, you know, if you're working with them. Secondly, go to the people. You cannot do community engagement without getting out of the office and having some level of face-to-face communication with people. In my opinion, I know there are lots of opportunities these days to do online engagement, and I think that certainly has its place at times, but I always think that it's never a one-size fits all model. If you are going to use online engagement, think about ways that you can still go to the people. Think about people who may not be able to engage with your online surveys if there's low literacy levels, if there's, you know, bandwidth issues, which we see across regional communities. So always think about, you know, what are the ways that we can get out of the office? And that flows into offering a range of opportunities. You know, even when you're doing face-to-face engagement,
Face to face.
off, offer a range of opportunities. Don't just offer, you know, a coffee catch up at 10 a.m. on a Monday morning, you know, when most people are at work. So think about how do we touch base and offer touch points for a whole lot of people in the community. So offer morning sessions, afternoon sessions, evening sessions. If it's with young people, do not do it between 9 and 3 when they're at school, you know, or if you are going to do it, then be at the school. Don't have, you know, engagement opportunities when whatever cohort or group of people that you're wanting to engage with aren't available. And be respectful and inclusive. So, you know, don't go there with an agenda. If you're wanting to do engagement, you're actually asking people to share their thoughts and ideas. It's not about you. So be respectful of other people's ideas, but make sure that it's inclusive. So think about how are people going to access this? You know, how are we living inclusion? Are we doing an acknowledgement to country before any session? Even, you know, if it's quite informal, what does that look like? How are we making sure that people with a disability, or people with low literacy, or people of colour, diverse backgrounds, are going to be able to engage with this? Are we sharing information in languages other than English? Are we providing Auslan interpreters for the deaf community? All of those sorts of things. And it might, you know, seem like a waste of time to think of all of that. You might think you've got everything covered, but it really hit home to me when 6 years after the bushfire recovery here in Kinglake, I found out about a family who had not engaged with any of the recovery process because they came from the deaf community, and at no community events was an Auslan interpreter ever provided. So it meant that as the community were recovering, they were very much in isolation, and it was, you know, very much a government-run recovery here across the Kinglake Ranges, and for it not to have been on anybody's radar was quite telling. And lastly, report back to people. If you're going to do consultation or invite people to engage with something, whether it's around a question, whether it's around a wicked problem, whatever it might be, report back to them. How was the information that they provided, the wisdom that they gave, the time that they openly gave to be a part of the process? How was this information going to be used? Or what decisions have been made? Or in the best of circumstances, they're on this journey with you, so they're part of the process. You know, so that if we think about people being at the core of any engagement and actually asking them what they want from the process, we may not have to report back if they're on that journey with us, because they're key to whatever's happening. So they're key players, they're members of the team. But if you are going out and doing something, you know, ad hoc in community, or you're doing, you know, a research project for your organisation, and you're asking people to contribute, it is absolutely paramount. And the most respectful thing that you can do is go back and let them know how that information's been used. Because what we find is, when we have that, whether it's engagement or consultation fatigue, it's generally as a result of people not knowing how their information's used. If you participated in a consultation or an engagement process and it was really clear from the onset what it was about, and you were regularly updated in how that information's being used to shape whatever it is, you would feel like an important part, not just, I've wasted my time, I've spent hours going to meetings and I don't even know what's happening. So always think about that 360 loop, from the start of inviting people to coming back and letting them know how their time and their wisdom has been used in shaping whatever it is. And you would think that they're a no-brainer, but they're often not. Sometimes there are time constraints and we skip things, and we try and do quick consultation or quick engagement, which can backfire. We can actually lose trust if we're not open, honest, if we don't go to the people, if we don't offer a range of opportunities, if we provide opportunities that aren't respectful or inclusive and we don't report back. We can then dilute the trust that we've built up with community. So thinking about how do we do this, it's great for Michelle to sit here and go, well, these are the five key elements, but how? So I put together a range of engagement tools, and these are all, a lot of them come from either sort of ABCD, so asset-based community development, or art of hosting, and a range of other practices out there. But looking at things like learning conversations that we've spoken about in this series, kitchen table conversations, which were sort of developed by the Victorian Women's Trust and have been used a lot for a whole range of things around Australia, from starting political movements to or enhancing the voice of women across communities. Social labs. So, a bit like your scientific lab, where you get people together and work on a problem, and come up with, together, that true collaborating on an outcome. Of course, we have World Cafe, Open Space, Unconference, and I've got there online tools, because it's not something that I hate, but I always think it needs to be a bit of both. We need to think really holistically about how we're offering people the opportunity to engage. So that's me. That's sort of community engagement 101 in 15 minutes flat.